Good morning, everyone. It's delightful to be here amongst a room suffused with people with whom I've had meaningful relationships and with whom I hope to have meaningful relationships long into the future. So thank you for being here. And can I extend a congratulations to all apprenticeships holders here. This is the first time I've been at a meeting where apprentices have been present. And for me, that's a significant milestone. My talk today is about professionalizing the systems thinking practitioner, navigating structured determinism. And to frame my talk, I want to draw your attention to professionalizing and navigating. As is my wont, I want to go straight to the verbs, because these verbs are relevant to what you might do. And this is an invitation, as all my talks are, to participate in a co-inquiry. I don't have any finished, polished, definitive things to tell you. This is a start for you to take up the conversation and carry it where you will. I thought I'd say what I mean by structured determinism, just to get us going. This term comes from Maturana, whose work has influenced me. A system structure is the sole determinant of what happens within it at any given instant. A simplistic example is a transistor radio. You push the button, it's a perturbation, but the transistor can only do what it's structured to do. In a structured determined system, if you're outside the system, all you do is trigger changes in it. You don't determine changes in it, because it's the structure that determines what is admitted as a change. So I'd like you to hold that notion as we go through. My argument is that there is a case for considering many situations as if they were structure-determined systems. And in an exploration of them, that inquiry will have revealing and concealing features. So if you're to ask about the British government as a Westminster system of government, as a structure-determined system, what might it reveal or conceal? Here at the Open University, and back where I've spent so much time, I can't talk legitimately without invoking my relationship with Peter Checkland, which has extended over a very long period of time, and who has been a major contribution to the Open University and the teaching we offer. Peter's still alive, but unfortunately is not with us in this sort of bodily sense. Peter received an honorary degree from the Open University in 1996 and had a long period of association. Kevin Collins, my OU colleague, and I are writing a paper about this at the moment. Geoffrey Vickers was also a major influence on the Open University group. And if you haven't come across Vickers' work, I commend it to you. We have a photograph still, I hope, hanging on a wall in the area where we used to occupy. And there is an archive in the library of Geoffrey Vickers' papers, which I would commend to you. And I want to draw on something that Peter Checkland wrote in 2013 as a sort of opening framing for my talk today. And he draws on Vickers' work. Recently, I have been rereading material from Sir Geoffrey Vickers, VC, about whose work I'm currently writing a book. Unfortunately, the book hasn't been finished. 32 years ago, he wrote a paper about higher education. It has a wonderful title, 3 Needs, 2 Buckets, 1 Well. I wish I'd written papers with titles as arresting as this. The 3 needs are those addressed through higher education. First, the need for people in the sector to reproduce themselves so that their mission can continue into the future. Second, the need to provide the skills and knowledge necessary for professional employment, something which universities do via their 2 buckets, academic departments, what do we have to do in order to know, and the professional schools, what do we have to know in order to do. The third need is to transmit the human heritage of skill and understanding to new generations. The well of the title on which the buckets draw is precisely this, our cultural heritage. In our present situation, it seems to me that if the needs in the buckets are reduced to mere commerce, then there is a danger of polluting and poisoning the well. This is how Vickers described the cultural world. This overwhelming, ever-growing legacy, so easy to lose, so hard to recover, so precious an inheritance, and so weighty a responsibility for every member of each generation. For each of us must learn and transmit this knowledge as our generations turn over 3 times in a century. And for almost all of us, what we can add is trivial compared to what we can transmit or lose. How to preserve and transmit this heritage must be a concern for universities, SCIO and IFSR, I would contend. Think about that as new innovations such as AI come along and how that heritage is going to be conserved and how we as organisations are going to respond to the conservation of that heritage. So I'm fortunate in that I belong and have belonged to the Open University as a Professor Emeritus. I belong to SCIO as a member of SCIO, and I'm President of IFSR, so I can speak openly about all 3 of these organisations, which is what I'm going to do. And I have a subtext here about creating demand pool for systems thinking practitioners. And I want to unpack what I mean by that. Here at the Open University, I'll start with the OU. Our main program on offer at the moment, and which has been running since 2010, is the set of awards, postgraduate certificate, diploma and masters in systems thinking in practice. Some of you will know a lot about it, some of you may not. It comes with a whole set of certain modules and books done with Springer. Just to give you a feel quickly, from 2010 to 2010, there were just over 1,100 students successfully studied the 2 core modules in the master's program, meaning that they will have left with a postgraduate certificate in systems thinking in practice. Since 2020, those modules still continue to be presented, and there's roughly between 470 and 520 people successfully completed them in that time, which in itself is not an insignificant contribution to systems education, I would argue. The OU draws on over 50 years of systems education experience. These are the modules that the systems academics working in teams have produced since 1971, when the Department of Systems was first formulated under the professorship of John Beeshan, who was the first professor. These are the modules that are what you might call strictly systems or systems theoretical, systems practical, systems methodologies. And there are a whole set of OU domain-focused modules underpinned by systems philosophy and approach. So in food production systems, in environmental management, in information systems, there are all of these modules produced, including 2... sorry, I'm just going to go back to that. If you look at the last 2 modules there, evidencing systems thinking in practice, co-designing interventions and systems thinking in practice, are 2 modules written by my colleagues and myself, which were developed for the apprenticeship. Those modules are almost pristine because they've had very limited numbers of students studying them, and now they're situated as what might be called isolated assets at the moment, because the Open University is withdrawn from presenting the apprenticeship, and of course the future direction of the apprenticeship is unknown, really. In the early days, our student numbers were very high. And why were they high? Because the Open University ran a series of a series of foundation courses which people from different faculties had to take. You had to move from one faculty to another and do at least 2 foundation courses. That meant that a lot of people did the technology foundation course, which was run from the systems department, Dick Morris and John Norton being the prime drivers of it. And the numbers in those courses were between 2,000 and 4,000 on most years. And it had a big systems component or a systems block inside it. And this was a device which created exposure of systems to a whole group of people who thought there was something in it and therefore decided to follow system study in their next years. So it was what I called a demand creation innovation. And it resulted in our second and third level courses having very high student numbers. The third level course, Complexity Management and Change, a systems approach, which was the first of our modules to teach soft systems methodology. It had a failures approach, a hard approach and a soft approach in it. Later we created an undergraduate diploma in systems practice, but the undergraduate diploma lost currency as a sort of an attractor or a demand creating device, as do degrees as a whole for many open university students, because they see many of our modules as continuing professional development rather than named awards specifically. All of this was happening at a time when the concept system and the word system had gone feral. This comes from a conference in Britain in 2012 with about 5,000 attendees, and an analysis of the published material from the presenters and from people from the South in terms of concerns about sustainability and sustainable development led to this sort of distribution of language. So in the North and in those people presenting, systems was there, ever present. For people in the South, the word system hardly appears. The focus there is people. So there's this sort of juxtaposition of people and systems. And of course, if you go to this, unpack the word systems as it is used here, it's primarily used as a noun, and that has implications, which we'll talk about in a minute. I want to unpack a bit of that and ask the question, professionalising what? The dimensions and boundaries of what we're professionalising, given who we are and the fact that we are not systems engineers, we're not systems dynamics people per se, or we're not operations research people, which, by the way, have done quite good jobs of professionalising their particular domains. Peter Checkland in 1981, by the time of his first book, had realised and articulated that the then prevailing RAND, operations research, mainstream management science and systems engineering approaches had to that point been unaffected by theoretical developments of systems thinking, instead being systematic rather than systemic. Having developed those insights, it's unclear to me why he chose to reify a dualism in the form of hard and soft. We'll come back to that in a minute. This is a key diagram in the work of Peter Checkland. We have two observers, two practitioners, they could be you. One practitioner says, there are systems out in the world which I can spy, I can engineer, I can change, I can model, etc. The other observer says, I see complexity and uncertainty, messes, wicked problems in the world, and I can organise my engagement with the world in a systemic way and organise that through the construction of a learning system in which I may bring forth systems as models or as conceptions with a view to understanding, knowing, changing that world. And these are the fundamental differences that are encompassed in Peter's work and which, by and large, I would argue, our community globally doesn't really still appreciate. Now, I was asking Peter about the name of our group or department at one stage, and he said, I could just about live with Checkland, Open University Applied Systems Thinking, rather than applied systems, but would much prefer the former. So that's a commitment to this distinction between these two approaches. in 2002, in a paper here at this Open University, Peter made the claim that enacting SSM was a form of systemic inquiry. It's the first time I ever heard him say that, although he does mention the key influences of West Churchman and Vickers in his 1981 book. So a lot of my research, Kevin Collins' research and others here, has been around, and Natalie Foster, has been around enacting and refining and how you might do systemic inquiries, and it's built into our teaching. And he made the point that it connects clearly with the work of West Churchman. Later still, he revealed to me in private, over dinner one night or coffee, that in a week just before he started at Lancaster, he did a course run by West Churchman at the University of Lancaster. But nowhere else have I ever seen that sort of published and stated. So West Churchman was a much bigger influence on him than he acknowledged publicly, and which we have come to perhaps accept. Now, I want to pose the idea that if you think about observer 1 and observer 2, this is not an either-or if you treat your practice position in an as-if mode. All of those modes of practice are open to you, but you have to take responsibility for the implications of your modes of practice, in my view. And that's largely been underpinning the design of many of our learning experiences and the research and scholarship I've been engaged in. And one of the ways of doing that is to understand and go back to the distinction that Checkland made in 81, which I've used a lot, between, and reframed, I might say, as a duality rather than a dualism. This is not an either-or. This is a totality. You can engage in systemic practice, in systematic practice. And these are the, in a way, the equivalent to what Checkland called soft and hard, and which was constructed either purposefully or accidentally as a dualism. The reasons why we turned onto this at the Open University was in that course that I just spoke about, managing complexity, students thought or acted as if these were choices where one choice was a negation of the other. You had to do a hard approach because it was the only rigorous approach. So that supported your commitment to quantification and other things. Soft was fluffy and woolly, and no one would do that in their right mind. These were the sorts of arguments that our students had about the choice. And that's what dualisms do. So a duality is about how do you use the best of both worlds, or how do you create a world out of both, and moving up and down. And that places greater demands on your practice repertoire, but it also opens up many, many more choices for you to act in complex situations. Now, if we just go back to this diagram of Checkland's, he talks about observer 1 and observer 2. I've never really known whether Peter connected with the American Society of Cybernetics and the work that Margaret Mead and others did about the fact that all observations require an observer. All practice requires a practitioner. He may have, he's using observer here, but he doesn't make the link explicitly. But what I'm inviting you to do, and what we do in our teaching, is to try and move beyond a focus on methodology as the primary, or the situation you're in as the primary concern, to you, the practitioner. No practice can be carried out without you as a practitioner. You are central to your own practice. And even though this is a sort of common sense notion when you think about it, Our students in our programs have great difficulty dealing with this often because they want to be focused on the world outside them as if they have no responsibility for what the world outside them is and how they should engage with it. So all practice doing is situated and embodied. I developed in one of our modules what we call the PFMS heuristic. This is a way of conceptualising practice, all practice in systemic terms. All practice requires a practitioner with a history, a tradition of understanding out of which they think and act. We frame situations through our history, or we may purposefully frame situations or use frameworks of ideas if we're doing research and engage with situations in particular ways. And we use methods, methodologies, tools and techniques to engage with those situations of concern. For a scientist, in the natural scientists, they sort of skip F and label S as reality. We are more sophisticated in our practice and are aware that we can play around with the dynamics, the systemic dynamics between a practitioner, a framework of ideas, a situation and a method. And learning is possible then about all of those elements, including them individually and collectively. And of course, we take it further and we realise that all practice is usually done with someone else. In fact, one can't achieve very much without others engaged in practice. And so one can move into notions about social learning and communities of practice, which some of our modules do. So the arguments that are provided to the people who study our master's program are that you can choose dualities, not dualisms, and that as practitioners we need to climb beyond the mainstream, which is the systematic paradigm, but not abandon it totally. Human-induced climate change makes this even more apparent. There's a paper in Science in 2008 called Stationarity is Dead. And the idea that the world is stationary in such a way that historical data can predict what's going to happen in the future is no longer a valid assumption. Because human-induced climate change is introducing massive variation and variability. So we have to equip our practices and institutions to deal with that variability. And that leads us into the design of learning systems, which is ultimately what Checkland's work is about. It's not about doing soft systems methodology. It is about the design of a learning system which is valid to a given context. And this is work Kevin Collins and I did in all of the main cities in Australia about picking up research about water-sensitive cities and embedding it in the major cities and communities and stakeholder groups in each of those cities. So what I would claim out of this work is that we need to institutionalise systemic inquiries or co-inquiries in wicked situations and restrict projectification to tame problems. Projects are a structure-determined system which it's hard to shift. You can't do much of what you want to do inside the boundaries of a project. Build systemic inquiry or co-inquiry into governance systems. We have a climate change committee in Britain set up by the Blair government in part to keep governments in the Westminster system honest about climate change. And with all due respect, it hasn't been very good at it. And why hasn't it been very good at it? Because it's not designed appropriately to invade, if you like, or to sublimate the structure-determined system of a Westminster style of government. If it had been framed as an ongoing systemic co-inquiry with community engagement in various ways and institutionalised with recourse to a court to hold the government responsible, it may have shifted the structured determinism of the Westminster system of government. But it hasn't, because the government still controls who's on it, and they're not held by any institutional device to the recommendations. So, and we can draw on Checklandian understandings, but go further in the design of these learning systems, maintaining a practitioner focus and be open always to uncertainty and not knowing. One of the greatest traps is that of certainty. And of course, in accord with the systematic duality, that doesn't mean you need to throw projects out or programs out, but you need them in the right place, where stationarity operates or where systematic function is important, but for heaven's sake, embed them in a broader systemic inquiry where you are prepared to admit that you don't know what to do. And quite frankly, in relation to human-induced climate change, we don't know what to do. And there are many phenomena like that in all of our lives and organisations. Okay, this is the end of the OU bit. It's only one slide devoted to the systems thinking practitioner, because the bulk of my life from 2017 to 2023, when I retired from the Open University, was devoted to the systems thinking practitioner work. And that's why I'm delighted to see apprentices here, but why I'm also very distressed by where we've got to at the moment. To me, it's a classic demand pull institution. We were able to use the device of what a level 7 apprenticeship was, the funding arrangements, and other things, the work of the employer group and great support from SIO and alumni and other things to enable this initiative to take place. We had tremendous support in the early days from the Open University. I should flag Professor Lucia Rapinotti and David Sharp, who were very, very supportive. I mean, that support didn't always last. It didn't last at all, actually. But we started off operating in an open university which had as its strategic plan a commitment to apprenticeship education and a faculty with a espoused commitment to apprenticeship education. But this was the classic sort of difference between theory and use and espoused theory. So the systems thinking practitioner is a complex demand pull institution but generated collaboratively, and I think that's a really critical issue in moving forward. It was about across the sector, and it was successful managing for emergence. And so I would say, look to the design processes that went on to create the apprenticeship, and for heaven's sake, SIO and the Open University, and with whatever support IFSR can give, create a new design process. Let's design something with what we have now to move into a new territory. So I invite you all to think about that and do it. Okay, SIO. I'm a member of SIO. I presented at SIO, but I just want to pick it up on a very nice experience of presenting in SIO Finland, and the two colleagues here today. I like the SIO model. I think it's a great model, and I like the way it's expanding, and I like the way it's franchising and other things. As SIO is a member of IFSR, we will do whatever we can to support as best we can. But there are some things that you might like to take on board at some stage in the future. The SIO event in Finland, my talk there was why Finland seems well placed to enact systemic governance, which is built on the book that Ed Straw and I wrote. But it also draws off work I did with Martin Reynolds here at the Open University to produce the new module, in which I included material from Toby Lowe's case study of largely the work of Olli-Pekka Heinonen, who was Minister for Education, States Minister, and is currently the Director General of the International Baccalaureate Program, in what he did in Finland in terms of innovation. And I would point you to it. The Finns were doing what they called humble government, trying to explore, starting in about 2010, 2012. The features were supporting local learning and experimentation, not to dictate and manage implementation of policy and practice, in education to create context which provides a growth environment for each and every child, and to enable experimenting with experimentation. So public policy was never, in this model, was never centralised and was never delivered. Public policy was an invitation for a localised group to enter into a conversation and design what needed to happen in that context. And in order to offer trust, central government needs to let go of control and support the autonomy of people working in the ground. The role of the leader should be to protect processes that support localised capacity building. And he argues that we should forget scaling. This is a radical change of innovation method. Usually innovation is about conducting experiments in order to find the right answer. But we systems practitioners know that it's not the answer that you're after and which should be scaled. It's the process of developing the answer in a given context that has to be scaled. Rethink accountability, shift away from traditional and hierarchical accountability towards peer-to-peer accountability. I've spent much of the last couple of decades, since Blair really embraced it, target-based stuff is just anathema to me. Because it's so systematic. And it becomes a system to meet the target, it's not a system to address the phenomena for which you're concerned. So obvious. Olli-Pekka, as a States Minister operating and with a long experience of working in the Finnish government, also created other innovations which were important demand pull innovations. They spent a lot of time on the process of developing cabinet agreements. All government in Finland is a cabinet, and so the cabinet agreement. He created training or experiential training opportunities for all the cabinet, so around systems and complexity and systems management, and they worked to, at the start, in the initial starting conditions, to create a sense of common purpose. Now, I don't think that even happens in the Labour Party, in one-party systems, so those seem to me to be really important innovations. And as a final sort of reflection on SIRE, this Janus figure is relevant to many organisations, of course. Any organisation that is not both outward-looking and inward-looking, usually it runs aground in some form or fashion. And so I have an invitation really to SIRE to continue to be looking inward and to be looking outward as well, and perhaps give some consideration to the structure determinism carried in the name. Systems and cybernetics in organisations. I mean, that carries with it a potential boundary judgment, and there are a lot of the work that I've done, Martin, Rupesh and Kevin here at the Open University, has been in the wicked problem situations of the interface between people and the environment. And those are not often constrained to single organisations. They are often ecologies of organisations, but they are broader than just organisations. And so I...
It's an S on organisation. It's organisation. It's one of your words, if you like it.
Okay, organising. Good. All right. Well, thank you for the clarification.
And you would not believe the arguments that were about, did it have an S on the end?
Very good. And the other thing is to encourage people and practitioners within SIRE to articulate their theory of change. I mean, it's one thing to choose a methodology, it's one thing to use a methodology, but what is the underpinning theory of change in which you're making those choices as practitioners? And I'll say more about that in a minute. Okay, IFSR, International Federation for Systems Research, formulated or incorporated in Austria in 1981, has been in existence ever since, thrived in the early years with funding from the Austrian government, but that ran out in the early 2000s. So funding is much tighter. We're in the process of developing a new website, and we're inviting all of our members to comment, co-develop that website so that it reflects the things you want us to say about you. It represents about 40 organisations who together have about 30,000 or more members and practitioners in some form related to systems and complexity. Now, the important thing about IFSR is it doesn't have individuals as members. It is an organisation of organisations. And it is modelled under my leadership and the current executive committee as a type of peak body, or an aspiring peak body, to do things for our members in the global community. Our members are scattered all over the world. These are some of the activities: quarterly newsletter, report to members, member dialogues, quarterly, biennial General Assembly, new website, which I've just mentioned, co-sponsorship, such as co-sponsoring this event here, strategic partnerships. We are the owner of Systems Research and Behavioural Science, the journal published by Wiley, and I want to acknowledge the tremendously important work done by Amanda Gregory, who's just retired as Editor-in-Chief, and to let you know that the new Editor-in-Chief will be Gandolfo Dominici, who's just started that role. We as an executive committee have also contributed an annual agenda essay about the cybersystemic community globally and published in Systems Research and Behavioural Science, and they're usually either free to read or free to download. And we are contributing to important intellectual debates, and as an executive committee we've just had a paper accepted in the special edition of Systems Research and Behavioural Science devoted to the future of systems thinking. And we have regular executive committee meetings. These are the papers that I'm just referring to. So I commend them to you and invite you to respond to them if you wish to, or use them as you will. And I also want to acknowledge the role that Mike Jackson, who was a long-term Editor-in-Chief, played with regard to Systems Research and Behavioural Science, and as a former President of IFSR and a Fellow of IFSR. This was a special issue, the first special issue I did of Systems Research and Behavioural Science, which was on the back of a conference conducted in this hall in 1995 about Geoffrey Vickers' work. So I want to, in discussions about IFSR, I want to leave you with an invitation which in a way expresses how we see IFSR at the moment. The key question is, how can we together build or scale up capability and utilise the potential for systems thinking in practice, or systems thinking practitioners, in our human-induced Anthropocene world? In framing it in those terms, we have chosen to go back to the concept of the global problematique formulated in 1970 by Hassan Osbekian and his colleagues in a report to the Club of Rome. They articulated 49 systemic factors which were threatening the future of humankind. And quite frankly, since that time, we collectively have not developed an institutionalised, effective praxis to deal with that issue, nor to deal with effectively wicked problems. The Westminster system is really lousy at dealing with wicked problems because it contains within it a structure-determined component which is called command and control. What actions could be taken within the international cyber-systemic community to enable greater solidarity based on mutual appreciation and respect for differences make a difference? We don't have a single view in IFSR about what the future is or what systems and cybernetic practice is. And it ranges from science and positivism right through to radical constructivism, etc. But the pressure I'm trying to put on all organisations is to be in a position to articulate what do you stand for. What's your purpose? And then come and have a conversation with others, knowing what your purpose is and what you stand for. At the moment, historically in this community, and it's plagued my life, is that so many people spend their life putting others down or bitching because their view of the world is not being adopted by other people. So my invitation to all of you is to do what you're enthusiastic about, know why you're interested, and don't make abstract claims. Say, I, as a practitioner, favour this way of doing and thinking about this situation because of these reasons. So, what roles could the IFSR and organisations play in enabling the emergence of meta-dialogue with societal impact? I mean, we aspire to be a demand pull organisation that creates demand that can flow through to all of our members. But that requires a Janus-facing capacity, which at the moment, unfortunately, is not structured into IFSR as a designed organisation. It's to do with income flow, it's to do with capability, it's essentially run by volunteers and other things of that nature. So you can't succeed in doing things unless the structures enable you to do them. But we're trying to break out of those. So, towards the conclusion. Professionalising the systems thinking practitioner. Professionalising and navigating. An invitation to continue some of these issues that I'm raising in your professional lives. I want to share what I think is the key aspect of placing the practitioner central to what it is that we do. All practice doing is situated and embodied. All observation requires an observer. Everything said is said by someone. And we live in language as a species, and language can be understood as a social technology that uses us. Verbs, nouns, indigenous languages, etc. All being, knowing and doing is relational. All observers, practitioners, actors have a history, a tradition of understanding out of which they think and act. Institutions in the institutional economic sense, norms, rules of the game which we humans invent, and technologies mediate our practices. And we humans live with a desire for explanation. And science as a practice is a practice that realises scientific explanations, which we either accept or not. And we live in a world at the moment where what we are prepared to accept as an explanation is under threat in the sense of its legitimacy or the trust we can place in it. A colleague at an event last year from the Chinese Academy of Science University, who's worked in AI for years and years and years, probably doing some very dubious things on behalf of the Chinese government, when asked what responsible AI use, why she was afraid about the future, she says, I no longer know what a truth is. So that brings us back to the Vickers Checkland quote at the beginning. And a human with freedom is a social myth based on inadequate framing choices, i.e. We are a mixture of all not human and non-human DNA in our very body, and we can't exist except in a social world. But this particular list makes a mockery of a lot of the framing that we make about ourselves and who people are in practices, in organisations, in government and other things. We have created a structure-determined imaginary human, and we live as if that person existed, but it's an inadequate framing. And it's driven in recent times, of course, by Homo economicus as one of the main drivers. So my invitation is for you to think about as if more in your practice. Let us think about this as if it were a system. Let's think about this as if we could change this. Remember that you're central to your own practice and that we lay down our pathways of our own walking. We don't have pathways into the future to choose. They're not there. We've got to make them. And we have theories of change whether we articulate them or not. Based on our work at the Open University, we would claim that many of our students have a remnant systemic sensibility, something that we mammals, I think, are born with and which we lose often through our education system in other ways. If they've come to our courses, well, they're investing in systems literacy. They're trying to expand how they understand systemic ideas and cyber-systemic ideas. And of course, we're trying to move them beyond, if you like, the knowledge part that Checkland referred to in his talk to the doing part and systems thinking and practice capability. But all of that has to be carried out in the technosphere, which we humans have created. All that stuff, we've laid on the surface of the earth, both social and artifactual, and we have to live in the biosphere. And our relationship with the biosphere and the technosphere is pretty problematic at the moment. And I'd invite you to take a design turn and think about how you might design institutions and governance arrangements that can mediate your practice. This is built into our teaching. It comes from a realisation at the Open University that what we were teaching our students often left them in vulnerable positions because they went back enthusiastic about the ideas and found no one else shared their enthusiasm, or they got sick of them talking about it, or alternatively they couldn't stand being there anymore, so they had to leave. I've even had people say it broke up my marriage. I mean, these are things that are said. So we have built, certainly into one of the modules, the idea that you have to take responsibility for your practice, but also learn about how you're going to design the context of your practice to create an enabling environment, emotionally, structurally, whatever. And so a design turn has at its heart the idea to act as if you operate in structured determined systems and that you have the agency to change them. Thank you.